Hello, everyone. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. The words of Bill Sizemore, quote, "White Americans have a lot to atone for, and we need to say it plainly," I told them. "My family stole your family's liberty, their labor, and their human dignity, and I'm sorry." Please stay tuned for a fascinating hour of how two Southern families confront a shared legacy of slavery. Retired Virginian pilot, reporter, and author Bill Sizemore shares his journey of racial awakening as he meets the other Sizemores, descendants of slaves his ancestors owned. Another View will be right back.
Discussing today's topics from an African American perspective, this is Another View.
Welcome to Another View. I'm Barbara Ham-Lee. The book is called Uncle George and Me, and inside the pages, you will find the story of the Sizemore family. Well, two Sizemore families, one white and one black, and they share a history of slavery. It's the true story of darkness and ugliness and beauty and love, and it all happened in Mecklenburg County, Virginia. We welcome to Another View from our Williamsburg studio, retired reporter for the Virginian Pilot and author, Bill Sizemore. Hi, Bill. How are you?
Hello, Barbara. I'm great. It's good to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you so much for being with us. So when every week I do a lot of posting on social media about topics that are coming up for our show as promotion for the show. And the words that I read in the tease, and I'm going to read them again because I want to ask you a question about it. Those words were, and this is quoted from your book, "White Americans have a lot to atone for, and we need to say it plainly," I told them. "My family stole your family's liberty, their labor, and their human dignity, and I'm sorry." Now, in reading the book, I found those words beautiful, but I have to tell you, Bill, I became afraid to post them on social media, and I was afraid for you. Was
Really?
I correct in that? And because I was worried about how, in today's climate, how people are so divided, and I just wasn't sure how a certain segment might take those words.
Wow. Well, I would like to think that you needn't have worried about that. All I can tell you is that so far, the book's been out now about a month, and so far, I have not had any negative reaction.
Really?
Not any. Now, maybe that could be because that old Southern gentility. Maybe people are too polite to say what they really think. But whatever the reason, no. So far, the reaction that I've gotten has been nothing but positive.
Wow.
Both from whites and African Americans.
Interesting. Well, for those who haven't had a chance to read the book, and I really hope that you guys will pick up a copy of Uncle George and Me, because it's not only your family story, but it's also the history of African Americans in Virginia. From the beginning through the Civil War, through Reconstruction. I mean, it kind of covers the whole gamut. And there's a lot of very interesting facts in here that I was unaware of prior to reading the book. But what started you on the journey to discover that your family owned slaves to begin with?
It almost happened in sort of an accidental, offhanded way. I actually relate this story in the book. I was still working at the time for the pilot, and I happened to be in Utah on an assignment for the paper, and had a couple hours to kill before I got my plane home, and decided to visit the world headquarters of the Mormon Church in Salt Lake City, which includes the world's largest genealogical library. The Mormons are genealogy is very important to them. So I went in, and this very friendly volunteer asked me what I'd like to know about my family history. And I just said almost offhandedly, well, I'm curious as to whether any of my ancestors had slaves.
Is that something you had thought about in the past?
The thought had crossed my mind, but I hadn't really focused on it. It is something. It's a topic that never came up in my family when I was growing up. I raised the question very late in life. I mean, I was in my 60s by the time I got around to wondering, and I'm sort of embarrassed to admit that now because, I spent my whole career as a journalist, as an investigative reporter. It probably should have occurred to me much earlier to ask, hey, my ancestors were farmers, tobacco farmers in Virginia before the Civil War. So really, it should have been no surprise to me that they were slave owners. But for whatever reason, all of my growing up years, my parents never mentioned it. And when I was researching the book, I surveyed my cousins. My dad he had like 5 siblings, so I have a lot of cousins. And, I asked them, and I said, in every case, the answer was the same. It never came up in their families either. So that raises the question, did our parents not know? Or did they know and just choose not to talk about it?
And did you come to a conclusion? I
did not. That generation is all gone now. They're not around to ask.
Yeah.
My cousins, the consensus of my cousins seemed to be that our parents probably didn't know. I'm a little skeptical of that myself, but like I say, we'll never know. I sort of coined a term for this, and I think a lot of Southerners probably are afflicted by it. I call it self-induced amnesia. I think this is something that a lot of people, white and black, just don't want to. They just don't want to go there because the subject might be too painful.
I have relatives who have been known to say often, y'all need to leave those roots lie. Let them lie.
Yeah.
Where they are. Don't start digging up those roots. And there's a painful history. Sometimes there's just some things that have happened that they just don't want to deal with and don't want to think about.
That's right.
Moving forward. I'm curious because you talk in the book about a lot about the Black Sizemores, and we'll get to kind of how you met them and so forth. But you don't talk a lot about the reaction of your family in terms of your digging up these roots. I understand your parents and that generation are gone, but was there any pushback from your side of the Sizemores in terms of, what, you ought to leave this alone and not bring this up?
Good question. And actually, the answer is no. I have received no pushback. And again, it could be that, again, that Southern gentility, maybe, people are just too polite to say so. But no one has so far said, no, you shouldn't have gone there. In fact, several of my relatives, my brother and several of my cousins, have said, right on, this is something that we need to talk about. And thank you for writing the book.
Wow. So you were in the genealogy room, you were going through the records, you find out that, in fact, a great-great-great-grandfather
That's right. Daniel Sizemore was his name. He was a tobacco farmer in Mecklenburg County, Virginia, before the Civil War, and it was very easy to find. Once I asked the question, it just took a couple of minutes, and there it was on the computer screen in front of me, a slave schedule from the 1860 census, showing that that old Daniel was the owner of 16 people. It kind of, even though as I said earlier, it probably shouldn't have been a surprise. Still, it kind of threw me back on my heels.
Yeah, reality.
When I saw that, yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
So what'd you decide to do with it? I mean, at that point was, I got to go write a book about this. I doubt that was your first thought.
No.
You know, how did you digest it? What were your thought patterns as you tried to make sense of this?
Well, I took a little time to digest it. But the more I thought about it, the more I just couldn't get these questions out of my head. Who were those 16 people? Who are their descendants? And where are they today? And, what sort of scars do they bear from their ancestors' enslavement?
Were you curious as to whether you were related to any of them?
Yes, I was. And that question was resolved ultimately. I'll get to that. I'll get to that in a moment. But first, I decided, you know what, I really need to find some of these people if I can. I had no idea how difficult it might be. But I was just, like I say, I couldn't get it out of my head. I couldn't let it rest. And so, as it turned out, it was pretty easy to find these folks. I've caught a lot of lucky breaks along the way working on this book, and this was one of them. My family has an annual family reunion every August. And one year, I think it was a year or so after I had made this discovery about my ancestor, I just sort of idly typed in a Google search for Sizemore family reunion to see what I would find. And I found this wonderful website all about a Sizemore family reunion. Not my family, but an African-American Sizemore family. And lo and behold, it turns out that their family roots are, like mine, in Mecklenburg County, Virginia.
Wow.
And I thought, well, this looks promising. And there was some contact information on the website. And so I started calling around, and very quickly, I asked folks, who in your family can tell me about your family history? And I was very quickly steered to George Sizemore, Uncle George, as he is known by everyone in the family. And I gave him a call and asked if I could come visit him. And of course, this just came out of the blue. He had no idea who I was.
I was going to say, what did he say?
But
Hi there. I think my family owned your family. I mean,
well,
what did you say?
I didn't go into a lot of detail on the phone.
Okay.
But I said, I forget exactly what I said, but I said something like, I think your family and mine have a historical connection, and I'd like to come visit you and talk about it if you'd be willing. And he said, "Oh, okay." you come on by. And so I did, and we had a wonderful conversation. Once we were face to face, I told him, I said, hey, this is what I've found out, and it just seems like maybe you are descended from these people that my ancestor enslaved. And he said, well, you just might be right. And he told me this. He said, my daddy was born a slave. And boy, that threw me back on my heels again. I'm thinking, what?
Because this is like in 2014, 15?
Thereabouts, yeah.
Okay.
I said,
wow.
How, in this day and age, how is it even possible that somebody is just one generation removed from slavery? But he explained it to me, and it worked out. The math worked out. Uncle George's father, Ben Sizemore, was born in 1858. And he ultimately had two families. He had 6 children with his first wife, and then after she died, he had 5 more children with his second wife. And Uncle George was the next to last of those. He was born when his father was 61. So I said, wow.
And Uncle George is in his 90s at this point, right?
Yes. Right now he is 98.
Wow.
He'll turn 99
wow.
in about a month. So once he told me that, he also gave me the name of his grandfather, who coincidentally was named Daniel Sizemore, the same name as my ancestor, coincidentally or not. So armed with that information, I went back to the census records again, and very quickly I was able to document his Uncle George's ancestors in the 1870 census, which is the first one after emancipation. Consequently, it was the first one which included names of African Americans. If you go back earlier, before emancipation, there are no names.
It's just numbers, right?
It's just, yes. The slaves are identified by number, by age, sex, and race. No names. Of course, they had names, but they weren't recorded. But beginning in 1870, they were. And there in Mecklenburg County, I found my ancestor, Daniel Sizemore, the white Daniel Sizemore. And the very next entry on the census page was the black Daniel Sizemore, Uncle George's grandfather, with his 2 sons, Ben and Stephen. The fact that they were listed right together like that, of course, means that they lived right next door to each other, because the census entries were put in the order in which the census taker got to those
houses. Got you.
So they lived right next to each other. Very, very likely, Uncle George's ancestors lived in the same cabin that they lived in as slaves. So we documented that, and then to get to your other question, both of us, of course, wondered, well, are we related? Are we related by blood? Because, as has become increasingly clear in recent years, as more people do this kind of research, there was it was very, very common for white slave owners to take advantage of their position to have intimate relations with their slaves. In many cases, it probably would not be inappropriate to use the term rape to describe that, that kind of relationship. We decided to try to find out. So we did DNA testing. Uncle George and I each took a DNA test, which it tests for the Y chromosome, which occurs only in males. It's passed from father to son, etc. And the results came up negative, which means that he and I do not have any shared male ancestor. And then, just to double check, we did a second test. One of Uncle George's nieces and I took a different kind of DNA test, one that applies to both males and females. And that one likewise
came up negative.
No blood connection between the two. We were, I think there was a little surprise on both sides that it turned out that way. I think particularly on Uncle George's side. Something else he told me was that he already knew that on his mother's side he had some white blood. He told me a story about how when he was a young boy, there were two white brothers in the neighborhood who ran a funeral home. There were no black undertakers in Mecklenburg County in those days. And whenever there's a funeral in the neighborhood, these two white undertakers would always hug Uncle George's mother. And he was curious about it. He said, "Well, Mama, why are these white men always hugging you?" And she put him off. She evaded the question for a long time. But finally, when he was a teenager, she told him. She said, "We're cousins. We're cousins." It turns out that his Uncle George's grandmother, who was born in the 1850s, was her father was a white man. So we know it happened. We know it happened a lot, but apparently
did not happen on the Sizemore side.
as far as we can tell.
440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240 are the numbers to call to join our conversation. Have you done your family's history? Are there folks in your family, or have you found out perhaps that there were slaves owned in your family, or that you are an African-American family who has discovered the other side of your family? Give us a call and let's talk about it. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. Kelly joins us from Suffolk. Hi, Kelly. You're on the air.
Hi, thank you. I'm so interested in this conversation. I made this discovery about my family and myself a few months ago, and am pouring into the research much like you described. Haven't gotten to the end point. But several things that I'm kind of stuck on, and I'm curious your perspective, is first, how do I talk to my white children about this in a way that is compassionate and does not, what I worry about is calling attention to African Americans as other or as beneath, when they don't understand that structure of our history, and wanting them to understand the atrocity of it, and wanting to teach them humility in it. I know for me, it really struck me because I thought we came from pretty modest roots. So I really had to face the fact that my successes today, I couldn't deny. I could trace back to power structures in my history, and likewise couldn't help but consider the slaves on our family's land, and as far as I could trace, seeing already so much destruction in their lives and how that would certainly affect generations after generations.
Kelly, let me ask you before we let Bill answer your question. How old are your children?
I have 6, 12, and 14.
6, 12, and 14. Okay. Bill?
Yeah, boy, that's a good question. I think, this conversation obviously would need to be age appropriate. And I don't know, maybe your 6-year-old might be a little young for you to have this conversation with yet. But it seems to me the older kids are old enough that, I think they could take it. I think they are old enough to grapple with this. I really believe that truth is the best disinfectant. And by that I mean, I think we need to face the truth, no matter how ugly or painful it may be, and deal with it. And I think kids, at least by the time they are, get to be 10 or 12 years old, are old enough to deal with it. You also mentioned, Kelly, you always thought your family was of very modest means. Well, so did I. And in fact, they were. My ancestor was not a wealthy planter. We have this popular image in our heads of Tara, from Gone with the Wind,
sweeping plains,
the big
house,
big mansion, the big house with the columns in front, and maybe a couple hundred slaves. Well, that was the exception, not the rule. Slavery was a widespread phenomenon. There were millions of them. There were 500,000 in Virginia alone. People of all economic strata owned slaves. And, what that tells me is that there are many, many, many Americans like you and me, Kelly, who spring from similar roots. And I suspect many of those people, like me for years and years, are totally unaware.
Kelly, I hope that helps. It sounds to me also like you're still grappling with some of this first before you even talk with your children.
I am. Yeah, I think that African Americans in this country have likely understood this their whole lives. But for me, I feel like not just exploring my own family's history, but exploring Virginia's history as a result, and then continuing with the whole nation's history of slavery, I'm kind of realizing, like, oh my goodness, it's not just part of our history. Like, it's completely the history. Like the entire, our country is not about like religious freedom with Puritans. It's about this. And I'm feeling a little bit like, am I in bizarro world? Like, why is this not the only, like, the main thing that we're teaching our children and learning and in our curriculum and talking about? So I think that that's the part I'm grappling with too. Like, am I living in a different world? Like, how are we not being honest about this? And when will we have the talk? I've heard about the talk that African Americans have to have with their children. Like, we don't have the talk. And I think, like, I don't know what age that is, and I appreciate what your guest said. I think he's right on about that. But I think there is an age where we have to have the talk, the white person talk with our white kids.
Thank you, Kelly, for your call. I really appreciate that. That is part of the reason why we do Another View. Absolutely, because you're right. I mean, this is a conversation that needs to happen. And so I appreciate your bravery, and I wish you luck with talking with your kids, and I hope that that works out for you. If you're just joining us, we're talking with Bill Sizemore, retired Virginian pilot reporter turned author of Uncle George and Me, Two Southern Families Confront a Shared Legacy of Slavery. It's so much I want to get to, Bill, so and we're going to run out of time, so let me move on, kind of move you through a little bit. Question for you. Did all of the Black Sizemores embrace your quest and embrace you as once they found out what was going on?
Yes. The short answer is yes. I have become great friends with many of them. After meeting Uncle George, I've met many of his relatives, and in fact, I've been to several of their family reunions, and they are unfailingly just open and warm and welcoming. I'm always well received, and they were perfectly willing to tell me their stories, and like I said before, I've had a lot of lucky breaks in doing this project, and that was another one. Linking up with this family who have been so welcoming and so willing to share their stories with me.
You actually, they actually came to one of your Sizemore family reunions.
Yes,
like kind of
did.
In the beginning. What was that like? When I'm trying to imagine kind of the conversation, because a few of them showed up, not everybody.
Right.
And I just wonder on both sides, did you feel like you had to run around and kind of bring people together, or was it just natural conversation, or were people kind of wary of, let's see what's going on here?
Yeah.
A little bit of all of it, huh?
A little bit, yeah. I guess I have to say I kind of sprung it on my family. I had asked Uncle George, because this was one of their reunion moves around from year to year because they're scattered all over the eastern seaboard, all the way from Atlanta to Boston. But every few years it comes back to Mecklenburg County. And this particular year, theirs was there. So literally it's about 10 miles away from mine. And so I said, you know what? This would be a good opportunity for you to meet some of my relatives. Why don't you come for a visit? And I was delighted to find, sure enough, a whole convoy of them, about a dozen of them, led by Uncle George, showed up, and I had no idea what to expect. No idea how my relatives would react. And I said, "Oh, look who's here!"
Surprise!
But again, it went fine. They stuck around for about an hour or so, and the two families mingled pleasantly, and got to know each other a little bit, and then they went on their way to their other reunion events. As they were driving off, one of my cousins leaned over and said to me, "That sound you hear is my father rolling over in his grave."
I think I probably have to agree with him. 440-2665 or 1-800-940-2240. What questions do you have for Bill Sizemore about either side of the Sizemore's family, either of the Sizemore families? Margaret joins us from Newport News. Hi, Margaret. You're on the air.
Hi, similar situation. We're from a family that they split, and those who could went white and married white, and those who didn't became black. So we got together 2 years ago, prompted by breast cancer being on both sides. We found that we have similar personalities, similar professions. We absolutely had the best time and adored each other. And when we did our DNA on Ancestry, it came back that they are our closest matches. So discovering all this was a very pleasant revelation. And I wonder if the Sizemores found similar medical history.
So, Margaret, let me make sure. Okay, let me make sure I'm clear before you hang up. So, your family were slaveholders. Is that correct?
No. As far as I know, no, we would have been slaves back until...
Your family were slaves. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And then when after the war and everything, everyone scattered, and then those who were able to pass did. And from one set of great-grandparents, we have a white branch and a black branch. And we, the great-grandchildren, are the ones who got together.
I see. Okay.
Absolutely adored each other.
Okay, that makes sense. Thanks so much for the call. And that is a very familiar refrain within a lot of African American communities. But I would assume, Bill, that since there's no relationship between the two Sizemores in terms of family, that you may not have that same issue in terms of health.
No, not that I know of. Now, I should add that Uncle George's family is just, one family, one extended family who descend from 2 generations of my ancestors' slaves. But there were, a dozen or more other slaves. Mm-hmm. And I have not been able to link up with their descendants so far. And so there could well be, in fact, I'm almost certain that there are other folks out there who descend from those other slaves. Mm-hmm. And so once again, the question, it would still be an open question. Well, am I related to any of them? Well, that's possible, but
exactly.
we don't know.
Because your family, it was 16 slaves altogether. Is that right?
Right.
That's that they own. So
yeah.
One of the things that I noticed throughout the book, and you tell the history in such an engaging way, but as a journalist, were you as overcome or as surprised at the editorials and the way that newspapers described what was happening during the time? As I was. I mean, it was painful at times for me to read some things. I want to read one quote, one as an example. So you say in the book, above all, white segregationists were motivated by an all-consuming fear of racial amalgamation. Walter Scott Copeland, longtime editor of the Newport News Daily Press, wrote in 1925 that rather than submit to racial mixing, he, quote, would prefer that every white child in the United States were sterilized and the Anglo-Saxon race left to perish in its purity. I mean, when I was reading that, my breath caught.
Yeah, that's a pretty amazing quote, isn't it?
Oh, my goodness.
And as you point out, you could read similar material in Southern newspapers.
Yes.
And I quote a lot of them throughout the book. Back then, the racism was just so overt, so unvarnished. It does kind of take your breath away. And yeah, it is painful to read. I guess we've made progress.
Do you think?
Well, today, I mean, obviously, we've still got racism. There's no question about that. But at least it's not, it's frowned upon to express racist views overtly, in polite company.
I would if this were pre 2016, I might agree with you.
Yeah,
but I worry today, honestly, where that Southern gentility, that politeness, where has that gone? Because it feels like there are a lot of people who really don't subscribe to that thought at all.
I think you're right about that. What was it that Martin Luther King said? I'm going to butcher the quote, but it was something to the effect of the moral arc of the universe bends towards justice. It may be very long, but it does ultimately. In other words, he was saying, we are getting better.
It just may not feel like it for a lot of time.
It just may not feel like it. We maybe take 2 steps ahead and 1 step backward. In 2008 we elected a black man president, and what was it? Everybody was saying, "Oh, well, we're in a post-racial society now."
And African Americans laughed and laughed. I have to tell you.
Yeah. And then look what we did 8 years later.
Yeah.
I think we've still got a long way to go, but I think we have made some progress.
Yeah. Based on what you found out about your family and the research that you've done and so forth, I'm curious about your thoughts about the Confederate monuments and whether they should come down or not.
Yeah, another good question. I don't feel like I should impose my will, but if it were up to me, I guess I would have to say I think those monuments would be better put in a museum where they could be displayed in context. Mm-hmm. Now that. It's going to be problematic for a city like Richmond, for instance, which, as you well know, has Monument Avenue, which is, it's built around these huge
statues,
statues of Lee, etc. And they're wrestling with that. The Richmonders are wrestling with that as we speak. What are we going to do with these things? Remains to be seen what they're going to do in the end. But at the very least, I think these things need to be displayed in context. It needs to be made clear that these Confederate heroes, and I put that word in quotes, they were defending an indefensible system. And we need to say that. We need to we need to make it clear.
Bill, I've heard a lot of white people say, I can't help what my ancestors did. I don't, you shouldn't make me feel guilty for what they did because that's not me. Which is a true statement. I mean, it's not them.
It is.
But you mentioned in the book that you don't feel guilty about it, but that you, and I'm putting words in your mouth, so please correct me and say it the way that you say it. But that the acknowledgement that it actually happened is just something that was very, very important.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I don't feel personally guilty for what my ancestors did. But I do feel some responsibility for dealing with the legacy of slavery. I can't just wash my hands of it.
As you said, I can't get over it either.
Right.
Which I love that line, because how many times have people said to me, just get over it,
Yeah.
Why
Yeah,
can't you
yeah.
people just get over it?
Right, exactly. Yeah, no, I can't. I feel responsible for trying to deal with the legacy of slavery, because let's face it, it's very much with us. It's not just something that's in the past, so I felt it was important to tell this story in the hopes that it would spark conversations across the color line. Get people talking about it, and not avoiding it. I think, we need to. We sort of need to lance the wound before we can heal from it. Yeah.
We've got about 6 minutes left in the show, and I want to ask you about something else that you wrote. You're talking about Tom DeWolf, and he said that there's a relatively young field of science, I'm quoting from the book now, called epigenetics, which is helping to explain how the historical trauma of slavery is passed down to its modern descendants. In other words, it's in the DNA, is what this epigenetics. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, I'm not an expert on the science. In fact, I had never heard of it until...
Me either. I thought that was fascinating.
But basically, the claim is that the trauma of something like slavery can be passed down from one generation to the next in the genes. And that could help explain, how people feel even today, even generations removed from slavery. African Americans, literally carry the trauma of slavery in their genes.
What did you learn? What would you say is the most important lesson that you've learned out of all of this?
Several people have asked me since the book came out, what can I do? What can we do to alleviate racism in our society? What can I do? Mm-hmm. And my answer is, jump the fence, get out of your comfort zone, reach out to people of the other race, and talk about it.
Yes.
Because once you sit down with someone face to face, it makes it much, much harder to hate that person. I think a lot of racism springs from being able to objectify people of the other race. But when you sit down with someone face to face and get to know them on a personal level, it makes it much harder to do that. And that certainly is what I found as I got to know the African American Sizemores. We became good friends, and it just makes it much harder to hate.
I'm chuckling because I think you and I should go on a road show together. I mean, honestly, because that is a conversation that I've been having with people all over in terms of just let's sit down and talk to each other. Because you would learn a lot. 2 minutes left. What would Uncle George say, do you think, that he has learned from this experience?
I think he would say basically the same thing. I think he has learned the same thing I have, that it's very important to meet on a personal level and get to know somebody. And have this conversation. I think it's been a mutual discovery on our part.
Yeah, you've got a book signing coming up in our area. You want to tell us about it quickly?
I do. I will make one shameless plug. Actually, two things coming up tomorrow. Saturday the 6th, I'll be at the Williamsburg Book Festival, which is in the Stryker Center downtown. It's in conjunction with the Occasion for the Arts. That's from 10 to 4. And then next Saturday, the 13th, I'll be in Norfolk. I'm going to do a reading and discussion and signing at the Muse Writers Center in Ghent. It's Colonial Avenue at 22nd Street from 4 to 6 p.m.
From 4 to 6 p.m. And you can find Uncle George and me at all of your normal places to find books?
I certainly, maybe not all of them, but I think Barnes & Noble for sure. And, of course, you can go online and get it from Amazon.
Okay. Bill Sizemore, the author of Uncle George and Me, Two Southern Families Confront a Shared Legacy of Slavery. Thanks so very much, Bill. We really appreciate you being a guest on Another View today. And thank you
for having me.
Thank you. And thank you so much for joining us for this edition of Another View. All of our shows are available as podcasts. Just go to anotherviewradio.org and download the show of your choice. And while you're there, please sign up for our eView newsletter, a once-a-week reminder of upcoming shows. We're on Facebook, and so like us, and I'm on Twitter at Barbara Ham Lee. Next week on Another View, the Another View Roundtable featuring Alvian Lyons, Dawn Hester, Carol Pretlow, and Allison Moore. It's all about why we must vote in the November elections. This is the show that we were going to bring you last month, but Hurricane Florence got in the way. So we're going to get back to that conversation and talk about it. And just a very quick, very thank you to Journey for Success. Tomorrow evening, I will be receiving an award from them as a single mother who has built a successful career. So I am humbled, and I say thank you for that honor. Our theme music was composed and performed by Jay Sennett. Lisa Godley is our show producer. Todd Washburn is our audio engineer. And special thanks to Ray Lenz and Victor Bowen for helping us out in Williamsburg. Janae Jackson answered our phones. I'm Barbara Ham Lee. Thank you so very, very much for listening to Another View.